It's not ideal, but all right. I don't think we've been recording this. It was.
Get a sleepover at our house last night, so we're all a little groggy. Good morning, everyone. I'm Miss Rudy, and I have a story this morning that happens to be about birds, and also happens to be about Unitarian Universalist Principle 5, that everyone should have a voice. This is the retelling of a Sioux legend, Sioux being the American Indian tribe. This story was given to the Native people many winters ago, when it was time for all the young mothers in the village to go out and gather fruit and berries. The old grandmothers, whose legs could no longer walk quickly, were left to care for the young children of the village. The young mothers honored the grandmothers by giving them this great responsibility. It is believed that young children have many dreams and visions to collect before they are grown. With the grandmothers close by, all the children took naps in the warmth of a darkened lodge before sun had traveled his full path each day. On one of these days, while the young children slept, Crow and Magpie, two noisy winged ones, were having a terrible argument outside the lodge of the sleeping children. Wouldn't you guys turn around to face the kids in the audience? Here you go. Caw, caw, screamed Crow. Cack, cack, yelled Magpie. They were both speaking at once, and they could not hear each other's point of view on the subject of which tree belongs to which bird. One of the grandmothers went to quiet the voices outside so they would not wake the children. She tried to scare the birds away. Get out of here. Go. When she could not get the attention of the screaming crow or yelling magpie, they're still screaming, she called on Eagle to help. Eagle, the great winged one, was a sacred bird. Okay, he was a sacred bird. For both the native people and all the other animals of the earth. He was also full of much wisdom, and everyone looked to him to help with their problems. Oh, Brother Eagle, can you chase off these two noisy ones so our children can dream? Asked Grandmother. With a mighty flap of his wings, Eagle sailed toward the noisy pair. He gave a call of warning to the crow and magpie as he came close. But they were so busy fighting, they did not even hear him. When Eagle saw this, he yelled louder and came closer. And that is when it happened. Caw, caw, Crow screamed as he flapped his wings in the air so hard he nearly fell off his perch. Cat, cat, yelled Magpie as his wings too flapped up a storm. Suddenly, they both realized that they had flapped their wings so hard without looking at what they were doing, they hit one of Eagle's wings. Ouch! What is worse, one of the sacred feathers of the eagle fell out and landed on a small branch suspended above Mother Earth. It was a great offense to touch Eagle, much less cause one of his feathers to come off. Magpie spoke to Eagle. Magpie, oh, brother Eagle, we did not hear you so near. I am truly sorry for the injury I have caused you. Do you guys want to maybe turn around, like turn to the other kids so that they can see what's going on? Now, Crow was surprised to hear such an honorable thing come from the mouth of this rude neighbor. He spoke to Eagle with dignity. I have many times been a naughty bird. Crow, turn around and talk to Eagle. Look at him, thank you. I think this may be the worst I have done in many moons. I am very sorry you have lost a sacred feather. Crow and Magpie both went to retrieve Eagle's feather, and their eyes met, and with no words at all, they both knew that this mistake would not have happened if they had not been fighting. Magpie took the feather in his beak and spoke. Sam, you'll have to help him with your fingers. Okay, hold him up. I am ashamed, Brother Eagle, that my loud talk and harsh words were more important than me solving our problem. Crow took the feather from Magpie. Stand up tall, Crow. And he said, we have disturbed the two-legged children and torn from your wing a sacred feather, and now we return it to you with a request for your forgiveness. Eagle had watched all this with wise eyes and an open heart. He knew the lesson of listening had been learned by his little brothers, and he also saw that the grandmother looked on with learning eyes also. So he said to Crow and Magpie, Eagle, stand tall and make your speech. He said, give my feather and the branch it rests on to the grandmother. Here's our branch and our feather. Grandmother, connect my sacred feather to the branch. Dress the branch with beads and beautiful ribbons and leather and fur to make it even more beautiful. Keep it in your lodge and teach others to create this fine-looking stick. Eagle said, when we call this sacred item, we will call the sacred item a talking stick. Tell all the people that when they come together at any gathering where ears might be shut, to bring out the talking stick and let only the holder speak. This will be done in an honorable manner, letting everyone have his say. Pass the stick until all have spoken. Then a vote can be taken, and the side who gathers the most votes will make the final decision. Grandmother gathered up the branch and the feather. She was very honored to have learned this lesson, and every grandmother from that day on has told this story and helped the young ones to make talking sticks. Did you guys pass the talking stick around? So, oh, the very last RE lesson that we had before COVID, we made talking sticks with tree branches and yarn and feathers, and some of them are in the RE room. We also have these talking sticks as well that have rainbow ribbons on them, one color to symbolize each Unitarian Universalist principle. And at the beginning of most RE lessons, we pass around a talking stick. And we introduce ourselves and each tell the group a little something. So it's been fun, and I feel like it's worked well for us. What do you guys think? Yeah. The end. Oh, here's Eagle. Thank you all. Thank you.
Zoom in today.
Well, maybe we'll use the talking stick this morning when folks get up to talk about their birds.
Flip LIP.
How's that?
That's it. No trash. No trash.
Yes. it is now time for the offertory. One of the reasons that we managed to stay around for 55 years is through the generosity of members and friends. This building, after all, was built by members on land donated by another member. And it's another way of saying we wouldn't be here without the generous contributions of all who stepped through our doors each week. So in that spirit, we passed the basket this morning to keep the doors open, the lights on, and continue to be a liberal religious presence in Pottstown and our environment. Now, Carly will play for us hymn number 15, The Lone Wild Bird. And we can change the slide. Uh-oh, that's not the right one. Back, yeah. Thank you. While it's getting workouts. You can open your hymnals to number 490. Going to do a responsive reading called Wild Geese. Next slide. No. Skip that. No, go back. There we go. Somehow I'm out of whack. I'm sorry. Not always easy to coordinate myself. All right. Wild geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on the geese or otherwise. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Only have to share yours and others. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and clear pebbles of rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and leafy trees, the mountains and rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination. Calls to you like a wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, mountains and lakes, and Right, skip to the one that says our feathered friends. Wherever that one was. There we go. There are a lot of birds in the world, and they are really hard to count. Has anybody actually tried to do it? No. Because, you know, they fly. You'll be counting them, and there's a noise, a dog barks, a truck goes by, something happens, and they take off, and you've got to start all over again, or they disappear. You're probably, some of you, familiar with my recent experience of seeing 1,000 fin whales in one afternoon in one spot, or more accurately, about thousands of blows and about 100 backs up close. Well, on that day, what we first saw was thousands of pintado or Cape petrels surrounding the ship. Slide, please. As I thought about it later, that was probably a hint that something was up in the area, because they eat the same thing the whales do. They're going after the krill. These birds were everywhere, just flying in circles around us. And one of the things, and they were there as long as the whales were there. Now, it's not the first time I've seen them, but I've never gotten one in focus because they are really fast and they are really little. But I figured with mass, maybe if I take a whole bunch of them, I might get one. And the next slide, I think I finally did get in focus. Pintado petrel. And the estimate, and it's just an estimate because again, they're flying around, that there were at least twice the number of birds to whales. So we had 1,000 whales, we had at least 2,000 petrels. Whale blows were just easier to count. Next slide. So a while ago, a bird expert was looking at possibly thousands of birds around him. He was on a farm or something, I think. And he wondered, started thinking, how many birds are there in the world? So we decided to come up with a range, a number or a range of birds. And he and a couple of other researchers at the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, published their findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences last May. And they combined both professional science and citizen science. And they came up with a range of, okay, I want you to shout out a number at me. How many do you think they came up with? Don't be shy, just say a number. How many? Okay, that one's a little off. All right.
10 billion.
Okay.
8 billion.
Okay. Guess what? The estimate, are you ready, was between 50 billion and 428 billion. Now, that's a rather large range, and I don't think it would be accepted in many, if any, other instances. Yeah, somebody, well, how far is it to when you name a town? They say, oh, it's somewhere between 50 and 428 miles. You're going to go and ask somebody else, right? But with birds, it's really large because of a lot of things, and not the least of which, there are a lot of really little birds, and they can fly. And in many cases, we don't know exactly how far they go. So somebody can count a bird in Maryland and a bird here, but it's the same bird. And we don't have scientific data everywhere in the world. So in a study, that study covered about 92% of all species, or I should say wild species. They didn't count things like chickens because there are about 25 billion of them worldwide. And I'm assuming they didn't count farm-raised turkeys either. There are about 10,500 known species and 21,000 subspecies. And there are probably more since new ones are found all the time. And some birds thought extinct are just rediscovered. There was a thing called a Maui parrotbill, which they thought was extinct in 2019. But a bird expert heard it and then saw it on a volcano on Maui in last July. There was just one bird, so who knows? So on my vacation, I saw millions of birds, including an estimated 4 million on one island and around 200,000 on another. New slide. Yes, penguin, this is the 200, by the way, not the 4 million. Yes, penguins are birds. They're confused birds since they can't fly, but they're really awesome swimmers. And the babies, when you see the little ones, they're always, well, these got to be useful for something, and you see them trying to lift off. Next slide. But when winter hits, most of the species are out at sea, and they don't return until summer. That's a different type of migration. When we think of migration, we think of what's going on up here. And the one we really, I think, most commonly experience is the Canada goose. We look up there and we hear them usually before we see them. And there are these massive, massive groups of Canada geese coming and going depending on the time of year. They're big birds, they're easier to see. But the little guys, they're coming back too. It's always a joy to see that first robin in the spring. And here at the UUFD, we're waiting for the arrival of our birds, our little birds. So here's my list of identifiable birds seen this spring in the US. There are also a whole bunch of little guys I couldn't ID to save my life. Sparrows and wrens primarily, but heaven only knows what. So turkey vulture, crow, picture please, cardinal, robin, broad-winged hawk, red-tailed hawk, starling, bald eagle, next picture, red-winged blackbird, and a cattle egret. The next picture, which is a bird I never even heard of until I went into my book to see what kind of egret was I looking at. And this is I think it's a teenager because it's starting to lose its baby plumage and look like the adult. So I really should have Miranda around more because she would help with the little guys that are going. So I'm going to ask you to share your bird stories, your wild bird stories, your personal birds, whatever bird stories you got, it's fine. And I already told you about the opera singing parrots with our landlady down in Mexico City, but I'll tell you another one. And my sister, when I don't know too much, but she got a little BB parrot, about this big and green, and for her birthday one year, and she named him Sir Edmund because as they were bringing him home in the cage, he was climbing all over the place. So she thought naming him after Sir Edmund Hillary would be a great thing. And he was really cute. And as we were children, we taught him to say things like, "Here, kitty, kitty." And he would call us in a very crabby voice, "Becky, come here. Mary, come here." Mom said, "Do I really sound that grouchy?" One very warm Halloween, Becky had him in his little cage on the front yard, in the front yard. The big one was in her bedroom. Problem was he could open the door to that little cage, and he did, and he took off. So that night while we were out trick-or-treating, we asked everyone if they'd seen a little green parrot. And it was getting cold, and we were very worried about our little bird. Next morning, we got a call from one of her classmates. The little boy had been out walking, the bird landed on his shoulder and would not get off. So he walked to his father's office about a mile away with her bird holding on with his claws and said, "This guy went away, you don't have a bird." And the father said, "Well, it's probably somebody's pet, so let's take him home." So the little boy surrendered his bedroom to Sir Edmund for the night. The next day, they were talking to some friends about this crazy bird landing on the little boy's shoulder. And turns out we had been trick-or-treating at that house. So they called us, and that's how Becky got her bird. And so now it's your turn to share some bird stories, and I'm going to call up Miranda, because if you change to the next slide, Miranda sent me this picture, and she's got the story to go along with it. Good morning. Oh. Now,
Just tell me when you want me to bring up the other power.
okay. That's much yet.
The title of this little story is A Massachusetts Yankee in a Georgia Swamp. While I was bird watching in a swamp on St. Simon Island off the coast of Georgia, I was taken aback by a strange sight. I was walking near a small body of water, which you usually do when you're in a swamp. And across this pool or pond, whatever it was, the shore was bordered thickly by a stand of very tall deciduous trees, covered with vines and hanging down to the water surface. At the water line, everything was in shadow. And just in front of the curtain of vines, I could just barely see what looked for all the world like a black snake with a long spear-like face. Just picture the top part of the bird. In this picture, you can see under the water, you can see, but they actually swim just with their necks and their head above. So it startled me a little. I had a creepy feeling that I'd been transported for a moment to a time before the existence of humans and a place with unfamiliar creatures, like maybe the ones portrayed in the unknown waters of an ancient map. You know, those funny little things they would draw. I shuddered a little and scrambled to dig my field guides out of my day pack, mindful that my walk that day was probably seen as a dangerous intrusion by numerous other local residents. And an alligator, actually, that looked to be about 12 feet long, that I had just a moment before spotted cruising close to the shore. And to me, close to me, and who I knew might be a mama alligator ready to charge me in order to protect her young. So in the next creepy Jurassic Park-ish moments, I took a few steps back to put some distance between me and mama, and looked back and forth between mama and the snaky spear floating along on the other side of the pond or the pool. When I felt I was a safe distance from mama and she had glided by unperturbed, I set up my tripod and telescope and focused on the snaky thing across the water. What came into focus was 5 or 6 more snaky things moving toward the vines. In the next few moments, I will never forget, nor have I adequate words to describe. As a group, the snaky things approached the vines and slowly started climbing little by little up the vines. As they climbed, they revealed their long, skinny contours until I finally saw the rest of their bodies coming up out of the water and recognized them as large, primitive-looking birds. They inched their way up the vines together, spreading their wings at a span of almost 4 feet across, out in the sun to dry. The Jurassic Park moment was not over. As a group, they slowly spread their wings as they climbed up the vines, letting them drip dry in the sun. And as they climbed into the light, revealing a stunning contrast of white scapular and covert feathers on their otherwise deep black backs, a stunning sight, and one that helped me identify the birds. I suppose I'd heard of them, but being from Massachusetts and having only gone bird watching to the north, east, and west from there, I was seeing the birds of southern swamps and mangroves for the first time. These are anhingas, and you can change the slide. Must be Mary's.
On the other disc, on the other.
Oh, okay.
Hers, yeah.
All right. Hang on. All right. How about that?
This actually makes me feel terrific because I have so much trouble working things like this.
Okay.
Appears I'm in really good company.
Is that-
And yes, no. This would be, no, this is Massachusetts Yankee in a Georgia swamp.
A different PowerPoint?
No, it should be on the same,
Oh, okay, got it.
there it is, now, 2 slides. There, and hinga. Okay, and hingas are fairly common and about 1 yard long and have a wingspan of almost 4 feet. They're a kind of cormorant and hang around with other cormorants and herons. Richard Crossley in his Crossley ID guide says they are aptly known as the snake bird, given its neck shape. Swims with only head and neck above the water, has a wicked pointed bill for spearing fish. When it flies, like other herons and other cormorants, it folds its long skinny neck up so that it actually appears to be necklace. So, and hinga, my first. So the next story I have is the Wrinklies do the big dip. That's actually another way of saying my husband and I went on an elder hospital trip to the Grand Canyon. Spouse Gary and I take turns choosing Rhodes Scholar programs when we want some adventure. He's into geology and I'm mostly into birds. On the geology trips that he chooses, I bring my binoculars and watch birds. And on my birding trips, he enjoys the geology while I'm birding. And Gary is actually a pretty good birder to go through. One year, Gary chose a geology trip to the Grand Canyon. The trip was designed for active seniors and featured a week of hikes to view the geologic characteristics of the canyon. Each day's hike progressively more difficult and culminating on the 6th day with a long hike down into the canyon to what is known as Skeleton Point. And then the physically demanding for seniors hike back up to the rim. I saw this trip as an opportunity to finally see California condor, which population was severely endangered by the end of the 20th century. And I'm quoting here the Defenders of Wildlife. The last of the free-flying condors were taken into captivity in 1987 to avoid additional mortality and to preserve as much diversity of the gene pool as possible. Reintroduction of condors into the wild began in early 1992 and continues today with the population of approximately 330 in the wild. I approached this trip with a little hesitation because about 5 years earlier, I'd had a surgery that undoubtedly saved my life, but also compromised my breathing stamina. I looked at the last hike on the last day as optional, knowing I could stay on the rim and do a day of birding, maybe see a condor, while others hiked down the canyon. If I thought that the trip down and back again would be more than I could manage. But my goal, my great hope, was to see at least one condor. By the end of the week, I had not seen a condor. And though there had been reports of condors soaring over the gift shop, many of the women in our group opted out of the, though there had been reports, sorry. Many of the women in our group had opted out of the hike down to Skeleton Point and headed for the gift shop. And I don't think it was to look at condors. Now, I'm not especially drawn to gift shops, but perhaps I thought I should omit the hike down the canyon and instead hang around the shop and hope that the condors would show up there again. On the other hand, I trained all week to build stamina so that I could manage the Skeleton Point hike. I like to do the hike so that Gary and I could enjoy our last day in the canyon hiking together. There was no guarantee that there would be condors at the gift shop, and I couldn't stand the thought of hanging around there all day. So I grabbed my day pack, made sure I had plenty of water, and set off for Skeleton Point with the group. I enjoyed the descent to the point. The canyon is so beautiful, and with the moving sun's light, changing the canyon's walls colors slowly and subtly as the day went by. Our leader talked about geological history of the canyon, but I wasn't listening. I was paying attention alternately to where I was stepping and to the sky, hoping to see condors. The day progressed. We walked down to the point, ate our lunch there, and enjoyed the view. Still no condors. After a little rest, we started back. We zigged and zagged back up the switchbacks, which you have to do because you can't walk straight up. The group all together at first, but after a bit, the less able of us slowed down so that we were all strung out along the switchbacks, with me bringing up the end of the line, ever more slowly. Sometimes I would stop and lean back against the canyon wall to catch my breath. And when I caught my breath, I'd step out away from the wall and take a step or two and have to stop them and catch my breath again. There was, by the way, a very nice Rhodes Scholar guy whose job it was to bring up the rear, and she was with me every step of the way. I don't have any idea of how long it took me to get back up to the rim, but I was so busy putting one foot in front of the other, I didn't have time or to look for condors. I just kept going. At one point, I did look up ahead to see if I could see Gary. There he was on 3 or 4 switchbacks ahead of me, about halfway between where I was and the rim. I kept chugging, and slowly I got closer to the rim. When I looked again, I saw that Gary had gotten to the top. He was waving me onward. I could almost see his smile. I chugged on. This was the most physically exhausting thing I had ever done in my life. It took every ounce of strength and lots of stopping to catch my breath. When I was about 2 or 3 switchbacks from the rim, I heard Gary's famous whistle. You know, the really loud whistle some people can make with a couple of fingers in the mouth. He used this as a band director to get the kids' attention. I looked up when I heard his whistle. It was indeed a very excited Gary whistling and pointing at the California condor circling just above his head. He said he could almost reach out and touch it. By the time I got to the rim, the condor had flown off, but I was thrilled to have seen the bird I traveled so far to see, and I'm mighty glad I didn't go to the gift shop. So do we have the picture of the condor that should be next? There it is. The condor is the largest bird in North America. Its wingspan is 9.5 feet. They feed on the carcasses of deer, pigs, whales, etc. They nest in caves, and lead poisoning remains a severe threat to them. And 40,000 years ago, they lived throughout this continent. Everywhere now, they're only at Grand Canyon coast, California. And I also understand that when they were repopulating, trying to get more condors, what they did was brought some Peruvian condors. I don't know whether it's different species, but they use that also to make the gene pool more, stronger. So that's it.
Very nice one. Alan and I had a similar experience, but we didn't do a switchback. So when we went to the Grand Canyon and looked up the Grand Canyon, it's a little bit easier for us. And this is just some short blurbs, memories of birds. I haven't been birding a lot recently, but I started way back in my late 20s, and hours in the woods. And I had a friend who was quite a good birder when I lived in western Pennsylvania. And we would go out to this one reservoir because there was always something there. And this time that we went out, there were trumpeter swans. So we thought, oh, we have to get closer. You know, they're just beautiful. That's not exactly quite beautiful, but you know, they have that picture with their wings back on their back, and little babies sitting on their backs. And so we're walking along the edge of the reservoir, and one swan, the male, stood up. And he stood up like that, but a lot taller. They can be 5'5", which is 8 when they stand up, or 5'11". So this one stood up, but I chose that picture because he was like this, looking right at us. And he was saying, I don't like you. It's time for you to go. And as we slowly took a couple steps forward, because we wanted to see the mom and we wanted to see if there was any babies, he was saying, no, you just have to go. And he just kept walking slower and slower. So we decided we would do one of these. And but that triggered something, because he said, oh, even though you're going away, I'm going to charge you. So we have this angry swan squawking and charging toward us, and we just ran away. But he won totally, and we didn't get to see if there was any little signets on with the mother or eggs or whatever. But that was a really neat experience. You don't forget those. Okay, the next one. Okay, this is on your right, I guess, no, your left. The owl, the little owlets and the great horned owl in the tree. Years ago, I moved out here because Alan and I were going to get married. He already lived here. So this is like 35 years ago. And he lived in English Village in Montgomery County. And there was a wood patch beside this apartment complex. So we would go out and walk, and he said, there's an owl out there. So we walked out, and he was just walking down this little path, and there's this giant tree. And up 3/4 of the way up a very tall tree, we could see baby heads, fuzzy little baby heads. It was like, oh, aren't they cute? And then you look a little further, there was an owl like that. But he or she had put himself up and was looking down. And so we just stood there, like, okay, we don't want this big owl coming down at us, but it was just a wonderful sight to be able to see fuzzy little baby heads, and probably mama, but it could have been up in that tree protecting those babies. And the babies stay with their parents for about 9 to 10 weeks, and then they go on. The next picture on the right is a wood carving, and it's an actual, it's not flat. But I worked in nursing homes, assisted living, about 7 or 8 years ago. And one of the people that I worked with was a former wood carver. So he carved a snowy owl and he had it on his wall. And I just thought it was absolutely gorgeous. The detail in it is impeccable. And did you put the other one up too? Because there was another picture with that.
I think oh, no, I didn't, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's right, because there was a close up. But I just put that in there because I thought it was gorgeous. Okay, the next one is kind of shown sort of. And this is a loon, but obviously they don't have little flowers on their back. When Alan and I first met, this is a year before we got married, we went to the Adirondacks to go hiking. And it was like a nice morning after we pitched our tent, and we went out to this lake, and it was a little misty, and there were loons along the water making their little calls, and that became our bird. I don't know if any of you have a bird for your relationship, but we have one, and it's the loon. So this is like 35 years ago. And one of the things interesting about the loon is that their bones are solid. I think a lot about birds, and they're lightweight and they have hollow bones. but the loons have more solid of a bone to help them dive, and be a little more dense to get down to the depth, and they just take the air out of their wing feathers a bit and then dive down. So they are slightly less buoyant, but they can get to where they need to go. And one last story, I don't have a picture for it, but years ago we used to have a women's group here, and we would go to different people's houses, and there was a woman who was not a member here, but she always came to the group, who lived in Phoenixville near one of the corporate centers, I can't remember where. But there were 2 sets of nesting eagles in that corporate center. So we went to her house, had dinner, and we did our women's group meditation. And then as part of our meditation, we walked down one of the highways in Phoenixville to this corporate center where we could just stand there and wait for the eagles, their bald eagles, to come be on their nest. And the pictures that I took were all horrible, so I didn't bring any in. But it was just such a really neat thing to be able to see 2 pair flying in and out of there on nests, and we couldn't see any eggs or anything like that. But it was just thank you.
Remember those eagles, and they wouldn't let you stay there and park, they would run you off. Not the eagles, the people around would say, oh, you can't bother the birds. It's like, they will let us know. You know, they're not subtle. So I thank you, children, for sticking around, and we're gonna,
We came in and were asked to come in and share our.
right, and that's what I know, and do we have any stories now? And do we have our list of birds? We want to hear from the kids.
I think we talked about what birds we've seen in the last weeks while playing out in our yards, or what we've heard. And I almost forgot what you wrote them.
We're gonna add to the list.
Okay, actually have a list going.
These are mine, but we're gonna add and see what else.
We're gonna go in order of who's closest to me right at this second. Sam, what bird did you want to share?
I saw a hawk, and I saw a hawk flying over.
Neat, isn't it?
I saw Edward, I forget what they're called, but they were eating from my bird feeder.
Did you have a brown one? Yeah, brown.
A cardinal.
Red.
How big was it?
Okay. Okay, we have one hawk. No, see.
We probably saw a real cardinal.
So a while ago when we were kayaking, I think, we saw it on both sides.
That was at French Creek. There's actually a pair of nesting bald eagles there, and they have a nest on the little pond, Scott's Run. Teddy, sorry.
I saw a woodpecker.
And what did it sound like?
It sounded like just drums.
Yeah. What kind of birds do you see? What is that? They say pee. Little brown jobs, maybe? We used to call them little brown jobs in my middle school science class. Not the most technically correct term, but you're a little brown job today too, aren't you?
Coley, what did the duck say?
Little brown bird, what's wrong? I saw a lot of them. So anybody else have any?
They're generally sparrows.
They're generally sparrows, yeah. But there are lots of different sparrows.
There's sparrows, nuthatches, there's all kinds of them. Erica sees them. She can tell you what they
Up on
are.
the overhead.
You know what, I can't, I think it's. It's something, it's in Patagonia, it's beautiful, like me, I'm blanking on the name. And I was in a moving zodiac, I can't believe I actually got this.
Careful. He's coiled up in the.
Albert has one. Thank you, guys, you keep looking. And we'll see what birds we see.
Right across Nevada, I was on my way to a high school reunion in eastern Nevada, and we went off the road to see a location where there were skeletal remains of old sea creatures, which was a sight in itself to see. But on the way back to rejoin the highway, I saw a bald eagle on the road having his lunch. His lunch was a local rabbit that was just the right size for this eagle's lunch. And he sat there and he tore off bits of it and swallowed them, and he looked so correct, so right, that we did not disturb him. He was part of the part of nature there, and he was doing what an eagle there would naturally do, eating some wild animal for lunch. It was a very majestic animal, something to see. But the time I spent in Utah, Salt Lake City, I got a lot of reminders of the fact that Great Salt Lake is the remains of a very large inland lake. And when the first Mormon pioneers came into the area, they were horrified to find that they no longer started planting crops. Then they had crickets, swarms of them, and eating up their seeds. There were more crickets than they could imagine. Then what they described as a miracle direct from God, gulls came and started eating up those crickets. And you got to figure now, in the years that Great Salt Lake was there and was part of the Great Inland Lake, those birds have been coming there every year. But to the pioneers, they never seen anything like it before. Most of them were people who were inland from around here, and they saw that they were being rescued by God from starvation, because with all the crickets eating up all the crops, the birds came, were sent unquestionably in their minds by God to eat all those crickets. They come by every year. Crickets aren't thick in recent years, are thick enough, and the birds still come. These seagulls fly quite a distance inland to nest around the Great Salt Lake. And you'll see them in there. You don't expect to see a seabird there in the middle of what's pretty much pretty desert country. But there they are. There they are every year still. Amazing critters.
Thank you. Yeah, we got all of Chicago too. Okay, I will declare a closing hymn for the beauty of the earth, and thank you everybody for sharing your birds and go ahead, Carly. Please read with me as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish the flame, but not the light of wisdom, or the community, or the fire of commitment. These days we carry in our hearts and in our hands until we are together again. Well, and the last bird story. I have pictures of this. I cannot find them. They're on slides, and I think I put them away safely. Some of you have heard this story, but it goes back to when I was about 3rd or 4th grade, pretty little kid. And I walked into my bedroom and I looked out the window and there was a garage. Kids lived across the alley on the roof of the garage, holding with right next to a little eagle. I'm not a little eagle, a little red-tailed hawk. And I'm like, Mom, Mike's on the roof of the garage with the hawk. And then I ran outside and climbed and got on the other side of the hawk. And I put my hand on the back, and he was, a little guy, wasn't a big one. And I put my hand on his back, it felt kind of hollow, and that poor bird was shaking. He was so scared. That bird was just petrified. What we didn't know is why he was petrified. But a couple minutes later, Mike's little brother came and brought the guy that lived kitty corner across the alley, across the street. And we handed the hawk down to this young man, and then we took some more pictures with the hawk, because let's face it, this does not happen. The hawk's name was Herbie. And what had happened is the young man had been walking in the forest, and Herbie was a little thing, and he'd fallen out of his nest. So he was going to die there on the ground, so he took him home and was raising him. Well, Herbie was getting ready to spread his wings, so to speak. But nobody was there to teach him how to fly or what to do. So when he would get out of the house, he would take off and fly, and he would get scared. And so it was on the garage, and he was not going to leave until somebody handed him down. So about a week or so later, we're looking down, and there's a fire truck and a couple of cops down at that young man's house. So we go, what's going on down there? So we ran, I do not know his name. We ran down there and we looked, and there on the top of the power line is the hawk. They had to call the fire department because the young man was trying to coax down with food and things like that. He would not come down. So the fireman had to get up in his cherry picker, grab the hawk, carry it in, and hand it to him. And then they informed him that it was illegal to have said bird. So Herbie was sent off to spend time at the local rescue facility where they rescued wild animals that had problems. But I'm pretty sure that every single one of us there that day will tell that story till the day they die. And that those firemen, can you imagine the firemen going, you're never going to believe what happened to me once. Somebody's going to say, I had to get this cat. No, I didn't get bird. So anyway, there are lots of bird stories. I'm sure there are tons that we didn't hear. Thank you for the wonderful ones that were shared, and for all the kids keeping track of things. So I appreciate it. So now one thing it does show that even though I've gone all around the world here taking birdie pictures, sometimes the story that's gonna have the longest impact is that one out your bedroom window. So after a short postlude, we will have joys and concerns.